The room was too quiet for the number of people in it. That's the first thing I noticed. 9 people crowded into Linda Carter's dining room, and the only voice filling the space was Susan's. She stood near the head of that table like she'd been positioned there, arms crossed, chin lifted, a small smile working at the corners of her mouth. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who believes she's already decided how things are going to go. Ryan was beside her. Not behind her. Beside her. But in that moment, the difference felt invisible. He wouldn't look at me. He'd been studying the grain of that wooden table for the last 3 minutes like it owed him something. Mark Reynolds was to my left, my attorney, a quiet, methodical man who had said almost nothing since we arrived. He had a leather portfolio in front of him, closed, both hands resting on top of it, relaxed, patient. The posture of someone who isn't in a hurry because the facts aren't going anywhere. Linda was at the far end of the table, Ryan's aunt. She'd invited us here, neutral ground, she called it. Michael was beside her, Ryan's cousin, watching everything with the careful stillness of a man who already suspected he was going to be uncomfortable. Karen Ellis, the family's oldest friend, sat with her hands folded on the table and her eyes moving from face to face like she was trying to read a story before someone told her how it ended. Susan was still talking. "I don't know why we need attorneys at a family table," she said. Her voice was perfectly controlled. "All Danielle has to do is sit down and have a real conversation, like an adult. Like an adult." I had been awake for 19 hours. I had driven 40 minutes across Gilbert to be in that room. And inside Mark's closed portfolio were 3 folders of certified county documents that Susan had never once thought to look for. I didn't respond to her. I looked at Ryan. And for just a fraction of a second, one beat, barely a breath, something moved behind his eyes. Not regret. Not yet. Something closer to fear. The particular fear of a man who has just started to understand what he actually did. He looked away first. Mark placed both hands flat on the table and slowly opened the portfolio, and everything that happened next changed every single relationship in that room permanently. But we're not there yet. Welcome back to Calm Drama Chronicles, the channel where real family stories remind us that dignity and truth will always outlast manipulation. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. We post new stories every single week. And if you've ever had someone cross a line you never believed they'd dare cross, drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to hear it. Now, let's go back to where this actually started. Several weeks earlier, I bought my house on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 7 years ago. I remember it specifically because I had just come off a 12-hour overnight. I was still in my sergeant's uniform when I signed the paperwork. The loan officer kept glancing at my badge, then at the documents, then back at my badge, like she was deciding whether to say something. I think she expected me to seem more excited. I wasn't excited. I was exhausted. But I was also more certain than I had been about almost anything in my life. I'd spent 6 years as a patrol officer before I made sergeant, grinding through nights, weekends, every holiday rotation, every overtime stretch that came across my desk. I had one goal during all of it, not rank, not recognition, a deed with my name on it, property that no landlord could sell out from under me, something that would still be there when the shift ended. The house was a 3-bedroom on a quiet street in Gilbert, Arizona. Lemon tree in the backyard that hadn't been trimmed in years. Previous owners had painted the kitchen an exhausting shade of yellow that I immediately planned to fix. None of that mattered. What mattered was that I bought it with money I had earned in my name before I had ever considered that my life was going to look any different than it already did. I met Ryan 3 months later. He was at a retirement party for one of our department's civilian coordinators. He was someone's +1 who laughed loudly, refilled everyone's drinks without being asked, and introduced himself to strangers with the ease of a man who had never once worried about what people thought of him. He was a project manager at a construction firm. He was warm where I was careful, easy where I was disciplined, I trusted him quickly. That's not something I do. We dated 18 months. Got married in that Gilbert backyard I bought in my uniform, lemon tree and all. 20 guests. Simple ceremony. His mother, Susan, stood in the front row in a cream blazer and took 17 photographs of Ryan and approximately 3 of the 2 of us together. I noticed. I told myself she was nervous, proud, that mothers are complicated. I chose patience. Susan wasn't cruel in the beginning, that's important to say. She called Ryan twice a day, which I thought was a lot, but Ryan said that was just how it had always been. She stopped by the house unannounced sometimes, usually Sunday mornings, usually right after I'd gotten home from a night shift and was running on 3 hours of sleep. She would bring food I hadn't asked for, rearrange things in my kitchen while explaining why her system made more sense, and ask Ryan questions about the household as if I wasn't standing 6 feet away. And she had opinions about my career. Not loud ones. That wasn't her style. Hers were the kind delivered softly, over a shared meal, in a tone designed to sound like concern. "It must be so hard for Ryan," she said at Thanksgiving dinner, carefully cutting her turkey. "Being alone this much. Night shifts, weekends, he's practically living like a bachelor." Ryan said nothing. I set my fork down. "Ryan and I manage our schedules together, Susan. We're doing fine." She smiled at me. The smile. "Of course you are," she said. I let it go. I always let it go because I loved Ryan, and Ryan loved his mother. And I believed, genuinely believed, that love could hold things in their proper place if everyone was patient enough. That was my first mistake. The situation shifted about 3 months before everything came apart. Susan's landlord sold the building she'd rented for 6 years. She was given 60 days to vacate. Ryan told me at dinner, carefully, the way he delivered any information he expected me to react to. "She's already looking at places," he said. "She'll find something." 2 weeks later, she was struggling with the search. A week after that, the prices were too high. And then one evening, Ryan sat across from me at our kitchen table, my kitchen table, and said, very quietly, that his mother had asked if she could stay with us. Just temporarily. A month, maybe 6 weeks. I looked at him for a long moment. "Ryan," I said, "did she ask us or did she ask you?" He looked down. I told him no. Not out of cruelty. I told him no because I knew Susan. I knew that temporary with Susan Brooks would last exactly as long as it needed to for temporary to become permanent. I had spent 15 years reading people for a living, and I knew, with the same certainty I had when I signed that deed, that letting her through my front door under those conditions was a different kind of decision than it appeared to be. Ryan said he understood, but I could see it. The conflict behind his eyes. 4 decades of conditioning telling him that disagreeing with his mother was the same as abandoning her. I should have said more. I didn't. The night it happened, I was working a full overnight, 12 hours, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. I kissed Ryan goodbye at 7:30, told him I'd grab coffee on the way home, and drove to the precinct. Normal shift, busy but manageable. I got back to the house at 8:15 with 2 coffees and a breakfast sandwich from the drive-thru on Route 60. I came up the front walk, shifted the coffees to one hand, and put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Slower. Checked the key. Same key I'd carried for 7 years, same key I'd had in my hand the day I signed the purchase agreement. I held it up in the morning light. The lock was different. New hardware. Brushed nickel. The old lock had been aged brass. I'd always planned to replace it and never gotten around to it. This one was clean. Recently installed. Installed while I was working an overnight shift to put money in an account that paid the mortgage on the house I was now standing outside of, unable to enter. I stepped back. I stood on my own front porch for a full 60 seconds, holding 2 cups of coffee, staring at a lock that had been changed without my knowledge on a home that belonged to me. Then I called Ryan. He picked up after 2 rings. And the tone in his voice, not guilty, not yet, but careful, prepositioned, told me he'd been waiting for this call. "Hey," he said. "Ryan, my key doesn't work." Silence. "Yeah," he exhaled. "Mom thought it would go smoother if the locks were changed while you were at work, since she's moving in." I heard movement behind him, a cabinet closing. The specific acoustics of my kitchen, the slight echo of the tile I'd laid myself, coming through the phone from inside my own house. "She's already there," I said. "She moved her things in last night. We didn't want it to be. She thought if you came home and everything was already settled, it would be easier, Ryan." My voice was level, completely level. 15 years of professional practice. "Are you telling me that your mother hired a locksmith, changed the locks on my house, and moved herself in while I was working a night shift?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's our house, Danny." His voice was careful, apologetic in the way that people are apologetic when they've rehearsed an apology and still hope it won't be necessary. I thought it was okay. "Our house." There it was. He had assumed, from the day we got married, that marital status automatically meant equal ownership, that a ceremony and a last name transferred legal rights the same way they transferred a sense of belonging. He had never once asked whose name was on the deed. He had never once looked at a mortgage statement. He had simply assumed, and Susan had built an entire plan on top of that assumption, and together they had changed the locks and moved her belongings into a home that Ryan had never owned a single square foot of. I didn't correct him. Not on the phone, not standing in my driveway at 8:15 in the morning after a 12-hour shift. "Okay," I said, "okay, I'll talk to you later." I hung up. I sat in my car in the driveway of my own house and looked at that new lock on my front door. I looked at it for a long time, and then I made a decision. Calm, clear, and completely deliberate. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to break down. I wasn't going to call Ryan back and say everything I was feeling, because I had learned a long time ago that emotion is the first thing people use to dismiss you. Susan believed she had removed me from the equation, but she had changed the locks on a property she had no legal authority over, and that was no longer a family disagreement. What I didn't know yet, what Susan had never once thought to check, was exactly what that deed actually said, and whose name was the only one on it. That answer was about to change everything. The first hour after I hung up on Ryan, I didn't move. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the Arizona sun already coming up over the roof lines, and I gave myself 60 seconds to feel exactly what I was feeling. Betrayed. Humiliated. Exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the overnight shift. Then I put it away. 15 years of professional practice. You learn to compartmentalize or you don't last. The first practical problem was where I was going to sleep. I drove to a Hampton Inn off the 2-2, not because it was comfortable, it wasn't, but because it was 3 miles from my house and it took a credit card without requiring me to explain myself to anyone. I checked in, still wearing my sergeant's uniform. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. I did not call Ryan back. I called an attorney. His name was Mark Reynolds. I found him through a referral from a colleague at the precinct who'd been through a complicated divorce the previous year. I left a voicemail, concise, factual. I said I owned a home, that I was the sole owner of record, that my mother-in-law had moved in without my consent and the locks had been changed without my authorization, and that I needed to understand my legal options as a private citizen. I didn't mention my badge. I didn't want this handled as a law enforcement matter. I wanted it handled as a property matter, because that's what it actually was. Then I tried to sleep. I managed 4 hours. Mark called back the following morning. He was methodical and unhurried, which I immediately respected. He asked questions in the right order. When did you purchase the property? Is your name the only name on the deed? Has any ownership interest been transferred since the marriage? No, no, and no. He said he'd begin pulling the public records. A few days, maybe more. In the meantime, I should document everything. Photographs of the new locks, a written timeline, any communications from Ryan or Susan in writing. I already had most of it. What Mark didn't tell me that morning, and what I wouldn't understand until later, was how completely Susan had miscalculated. She had built her entire plan on one assumption, that when two people marry, the wife's pre-existing property automatically becomes shared marital property. She had never checked, Ryan had never checked. They had both simply assumed the way people assume things when the truth feels inconvenient to look for. I didn't know the full weight of that yet, but I was about to. By day 3, the texts started. The first was from Linda Carter, Ryan's aunt, someone I'd always genuinely liked. Short, careful. The kind of message someone sends when they've been given one side of a story and aren't sure what to do with it. Danielle, I just want you to know I'm here if you need to talk. I know things are hard right now. Ryan's worried about you. Ryan was worried about you. I read that 3 times. Michael, Ryan's cousin, was less careful. I heard what's going on. Just know family is important. Hopefully you two can work it out. And then Karen Ellis, who had known Ryan since he was 7. Susan told me you've been staying at a hotel. I hope you're okay. These things can get complicated when careers take over. These things can get complicated when careers take over. There it was. Susan had been busy. In the 5 days since she'd moved herself into my home, she had already reached every person in Ryan's family with a version of events that cast me as the absent wife. Career obsessed. Emotionally checked out. A woman so consumed by the job that her husband had been left to manage alone, and what kind of mother would Susan be if she didn't step in? She had turned her own unauthorized occupancy of my home into an act of mercy. I didn't respond to any of the texts. I wrote down who had sent them, what they said, and when. Then I documented the locksmith work with a set of photographs I took standing on my own front porch. Ryan called on day 4 and asked if we could meet for coffee. I said yes. I still believed, maybe naively or maybe out of stubbornness, that somewhere inside my conflict-avoidant husband there was a man capable of looking at what he'd done with clear eyes. I hadn't given up on that yet. I just wasn't going to hold my breath waiting for it. We met at a diner near the precinct. He was already there. He looked tired, a little sheepish, the expression of someone who knows they've done something wrong and has spent several days trying to figure out how to present it in a way that makes it smaller than it is. He started with, "I know you're upset." I let him talk. He said he understood why I felt caught off guard, that it had moved quickly, that Susan was going through a genuinely difficult time with the housing search and he'd wanted to help, and he hadn't fully considered how it would feel to come home to Ryan. I said, "Stop." He stopped. "Whose name is on the deed to that house?" He blinked. "I mean, it's our home. We both live there." "That's not what I asked." "Whose name is on the legal document filed with the county?" He shifted in his seat. "I assumed both of ours. We're married." "You assumed. Danny, you authorized a locksmith to change the locks on a property you've never once verified you have any legal right to," I said. "And your mother moved herself in based on your authorization, based on an assumption that neither of you ever thought to check." He went very still. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I said. "I'm saying it because I need you to understand what this actually is. This isn't a disagreement about boundaries anymore. This is a legal matter, and I'm handling it as one." I left the coffee untouched and walked out. He didn't come after me. I sat in my car in the parking lot and let myself feel that, the specific weight of walking away from your own husband and not hearing footsteps behind you. Then I drove back to the hotel and got to work. Mark called 3 days later with the first document, the original purchase agreement. He read me the date, October, 7 years ago. 3 months before I'd ever attended a retirement party or heard the name Ryan Brooks. "Your name only," Mark said. "No co-borrowers, no co-signers. executed and recorded as a single individual. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the phone against my ear, and I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not yet, something quieter and more reliable than that. The cold, clarifying weight of a fact that doesn't negotiate with anyone's feelings. Pull the county ownership records next, I said. Already in progress. I want the full mortgage payment history as well. Every payment came from a personal account I opened 2 years before Ryan and I met, I said. Pre-marriage account. My name only. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Mark said. The county records came through the following afternoon. Maricopa County. The legal property description for the address, and next to the ownership field, exactly one name. Mine. No transfer of interest had ever been recorded following the marriage. The home had never been refinanced with Ryan's name attached, never added to any joint account, never legally modified in any way that gave him, or anyone acting on his behalf, a recognized ownership interest in the property. Susan had walked into my house, changed my locks, moved herself into my guest room, and spent a week shaping the family's understanding of events. Based on nothing. Based on an assumption she had never once checked. The mortgage statements arrived the next morning, 14 consecutive payments, every single one originating from the same individual account, opened in my name 2 full years before Ryan and I had a first conversation. I printed everything at the hotel's business center, organized it into 3 folders, sat at the small desk and laid it out in front of me. It was quiet in that room, and for a moment, just a moment, I let myself feel how small this whole thing had made me. I was a police sergeant with 15 years in the department, and I was sitting in a hotel room 3 miles from my own house, sleeping on sheets I didn't own, printing documents to prove that I had the right to enter a building I'd been paying for 7 years. I'd trusted Ryan with my life and my home, and he had never once looked at either closely enough to understand what he'd been given. That was the moment that hurt the most. Not Susan. I had always known what Susan was, but Ryan. The assumption he'd carried for 3 years of marriage, never questioned, never examined. The assumption that my house was automatically his too, that my name on a deed was a detail too small to bother with. I let myself feel that for about 90 seconds. Then Mark's second call came in. I contacted the locksmith company, he said. I waited. The authorization on their work order names Ryan as the authorizing party, but the service address is registered to you in the county records, directly tied to your name as the sole property owner. They have no documentation showing they verified legal ownership before performing the lock replacement. The room was very quiet. So the lock change itself, I said, was carried out without any confirmation of legal ownership, Mark said. The person who authorized it had no verified legal standing to do so. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. Susan had not just assumed she had the right to take over my home. She had built an entire operation on that assumption. The emotional pressure on Ryan, the timing of the overnight shift, the locksmith, the family narrative. Every piece of it had been designed to look permanent and settled before I had a chance to respond. And every piece of it had been built on a foundation that didn't legally exist. Set up the meeting, I said. Mark knew what I meant. I was thinking a neutral location, somewhere you control the let her pick, I said. He paused. You're sure? She needs to walk in feeling like she has the advantage. She needs to be comfortable, confident. I looked at the 3 folders on the desk. That way, when the documents come out, there's no place for her to go. A brief silence. I'll reach out to Ryan, Mark said. And I'll suggest she invite whoever she'd like present. Good, I said. I already knew who Susan would call. Linda. Michael. Karen. Everyone she'd spent the last 2 weeks carefully briefing with her version of the story. She would want witnesses. She would want the room full of people who already believed her. She just wouldn't realize those same people were about to watch her entire narrative collapse in real time. I had the purchase agreement. I had the county ownership records. I had 14 mortgage statements and a locksmith work order with no legal authorization attached to it. Susan Brooks had walked into my house like she owned it. I was about to show her, and everyone she'd told, exactly what ownership actually looks like. The night before the meeting, I laid out every document on the hotel desk and went through them one last time, not because I'd missed anything. I hadn't. I went through them because I wanted the order fixed in my mind, which document first, which one last, what each one would do to the room when it landed. I'd spent 15 years building cases. I knew that evidence isn't just about being right, it's about timing, it's about letting the truth arrive in the order that leaves no exit. I thought about Ryan again, not with anger, with something quieter than that. The particular sadness of understanding that the person you married has a limit you never saw until they reached it. Ryan wasn't a cruel man, but he was a man who had always chosen comfort over truth, and that choice had finally cost both of us more than either of us could afford. I folded the documents into the portfolio, 3 folders, labeled. In the morning, I drove to Linda Carter's house. Susan had filled that room before I got there. Not literally, she couldn't control who sat where, but she'd controlled the 2 weeks leading up to it, which amounted to the same thing. Linda, Michael, Karen, they'd all heard her version first. They'd been briefed, softened, shaped. Susan had made sure of that. When I walked through that door, she was already standing, arms crossed, chin lifted, wearing the confidence of a woman who believes the audience is already hers. I sat down. Mark sat beside me, portfolio closed, both hands resting on top of it. Patient. "Thank you for being here," he said simply. "We won't take long." Susan opened the way she always did, smooth, reasonable, the tone of someone who was only asking for fairness. She said it was a family matter that had been blown out of proportion, that she'd only wanted to support her son through a hard stretch, that she hoped Danielle could see past the legalities and choose family. Linda nodded slightly. Karen's expression stayed careful. "Nobody's questioning your intentions," Mark said. He opened the portfolio. "What we're here to address is the legal reality of the property." He placed the first document in the center of the table. Original purchase agreement, executed and recorded 7 years ago. He let the date sit there. That's approximately 3 months before Danielle and Ryan ever met. Linda leaned forward. Michael's arms came unfolded. Susan looked at the document, looked away. "That's just paperwork from before they were a family." "The second document," Mark said. "Maricopa County ownership record. Property description. Ownership field. 1 name. Mine. No transfer of interest recorded following the marriage," Mark said. "No refinancing under a second name. No legal modification of any kind conveying ownership interest to any other party." Karen set both hands flat on the table. Ryan, who had been staring at nothing since I'd arrived, was now staring at the documents. Mark placed the mortgage history beside the deed record. 14 rows. 1 account. 2 years before Ryan's name was ever in my phone. "Every payment," I said, "from the day I bought it to last month." Susan uncrossed her arms, then crossed them again. I watched her recalibrate the pivot, the angle, the reframe. "These are just numbers on paper," she said. Her voice had an edge now, something bristle underneath the control. "I raised that boy alone for years. I sacrificed things none of you know about. If I made a decision to help my son in his own home—" "It isn't his home," Mark said. Quiet. Factual. "That's not for a lawyer to decide. It's for the county deed record to decide," Mark said. "And it already has." Susan turned to the room. Not to Mark. To the people she'd spent 2 weeks preparing. "I was protecting my family," she said. Her voice was louder now, less controlled. "Danielle was never here. She was always at work, always gone, and Ryan was alone. I saw it with my own eyes. I stepped in because that's what mothers do. You all know that. You all know what this family means to me." Linda was quiet. Michael was quiet. Karen was quiet. And in that silence, Susan heard what she hadn't expected, nothing coming back to her. She pressed harder. She had already checked out of this marriage long before I moved in. Everyone in this room knows it. A career is not a marriage, and I won't apologize for loving my son more than she ever. Mark placed the fourth document on the table. "Locksmith work order," he said. "Service date matches the night Danielle worked her overnight shift. Authorization provided by Ryan Brooks. Property address registered exclusively to Danielle Brooks as sole legal owner. No documentation of ownership verification performed prior to the lock replacement." He looked at Susan directly. "To be precise about the legal exposure, the lock change was performed on a property the authorizing party had no standing to act on. That constitutes unlawful exclusion of the legal owner. The occupancy that followed was unauthorized. Danielle has documented grounds for civil action, including damages. We are offering the opportunity to resolve this today." That offer has a limit. The room was a different kind of quiet now. Susan looked at Mark, then at the documents, then for just a moment at the faces around the table, the people she'd carefully positioned who were no longer positioned the way she'd left them, and then she played the only card she had left them. "Fine," she said. Her chin came up. The pride, stripped of everything else, standing alone. "Say whatever you want. Show whatever you want. A wife can come and go, but a mother never loses her place." I looked at her. I let it sit in the room for 3 full seconds. "A wife can come and go," I said, "but a mother never loses her place." I said it exactly the way she had. "You said that to me once. And I think you believed it the first time you said it, and I think you believed it every decision you made after that. I think that belief is the reason you never once checked the deed, never asked whose name was on it, never verified whether the place you were claiming was yours to claim." I nodded at the documents. "That's not a mother protecting her son. That's a woman so certain of her own position that the facts stopped mattering, including mine." Linda Carter spoke. She hadn't said a word since I'd sat down. But now she turned to Susan, not to me, not to Mark, directly to Susan. Her voice was careful and tired and honest. "Susan," she said, "you called me 3 times last week. You told me Danielle had emotionally left this marriage. You told me Ryan was alone. You told me you were the only one holding things together." She paused. "Was any of that about what's in those documents, or was it just about making sure we were on your side before this meeting?" Susan opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Linda looked down at the table. "I let you use my house," she said quietly. I thought I was helping. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Then Susan turned to Ryan. It was the move of a woman who had run out of every other option. She turned to her son, the one person she had always been able to reach, always been able to pull back, and she said, "Tell them, Ryan, tell them this is your home too. Tell them we're family and this whole thing has gone too far. Tell them." Ryan was still. He looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he stood up slowly and moved his chair around the table, to my side. He sat down beside me. Not behind me, not at a neutral distance, beside me, and he said, "It's not my home, Mom. It never was." I didn't know that. I should have known that. I should have checked, and I didn't. But it's Danielle's house. It has always been Danielle's house, and what we did to her was wrong. Susan stared at him. I looked at the wall across the room. I had to. Because Ryan had just done the one thing I hadn't let myself count on. The thing I'd stopped expecting somewhere around day 4 in that hotel room, and if I looked at him directly in that moment, I was going to come apart in the middle of Linda Carter's dining room. I held it together. Just barely. Susan left the meeting without another word. Not storming, she was too proud for that. She picked up her bag, straightened her jacket, and walked out through the front door while Mark was still organizing the documents. Karen watched her go. Michael didn't move. Linda put her hand briefly on my arm on the way out. Just for a second, she didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I drove to the house that afternoon. Susan's car was in the driveway when I got there. I parked at the curb and waited. 20 minutes later, she came out through the front door carrying a box, the last one, based on how empty her hands were on the next 2 trips. She didn't look at me. I didn't get out of the car. Ryan was standing in the doorway. He didn't help her carry anything. On the final trip, she stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something to me, to Ryan, to anyone. But she didn't. She put the box in her trunk, got in the driver's seat, and pulled out of my driveway. I went inside. The guest room key was on the kitchen counter. The new lock had already been removed. Mark had arranged a locksmith that morning. My original hardware reinstalled. My house the way it was supposed to be. I stood in the kitchen for a while. Then I made coffee. Ryan stayed in the guest room for 3 weeks. His choice, not mine. He said he needed to sit with what he'd done instead of rushing past it, and for the first time in our marriage I believed him without reservation. Because a man who had spent 40 years avoiding uncomfortable truths had just chosen the hardest one in front of witnesses. That meant something. It didn't fix everything. Trust doesn't reassemble on a timeline. But it was a start. Linda called me the morning after the meeting. No excuses. No explanation for the texts she'd sent. Just, I should have asked you before I believed her. I'm sorry, Danielle. That was enough. Michael never called. I'd expected that. Some people, when they realize they backed the wrong side, go quiet and stay there. That's an answer too. Karen sent a card. Handwritten, 3 sentences. She said she should have known better, and that she was glad the truth came out. I kept the card. Here's the thing I've thought about since. People assume justice has to be loud to be real. That it has to involve someone losing their composure, or saying the thing you'd been holding back for months, or watching someone get exactly what they deserve in the most satisfying possible way. But I've worked in law enforcement for 15 years. And what I've learned is that the most permanent form of justice is the kind that doesn't need your emotion to hold it up. The kind built on documents and facts and a legal record that outlasts everyone's feelings, including yours. I didn't scream at Susan. I didn't threaten her. I didn't use my badge. I let the deed record speak. I let the mortgage statement speak. I let the locksmith work order speak. And when she looked across that table at the people she'd spent 2 weeks preparing and found them staring at the table instead of nodding, that silence was the most complete consequence I could have arranged. She built her plan on what she assumed, and the truth dismantled it piece by piece in front of every person whose opinion she cared about. I didn't need to do anything else. I moved back into my house on a Tuesday, same as the day I bought it. 7 years apart, same day of the week, same uniform hanging in the closet. I went out to the backyard before I did anything else. The lemon tree was still there. Same branches, same weight, untrimmed the same way it had been untrimmed the day I signed the paperwork in my uniform, exhausted and certain and alone. It didn't know any of this had happened. It had just kept growing. I stood there until the light changed. Then I went inside and made dinner. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever had someone walk into your life like they owned it and treat your boundaries like they were optional, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If you're new here, this is Calm Drama Chronicles. We tell the stories of people who chose integrity when it would have been so much easier to lose their composure, and watched the truth do the work for them. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to hear that patience, backed by facts, is the strongest thing there is. The next story is coming soon, and I promise you, you won't see it coming.